Good evening. I now call to order the March 10th, 2025 meeting of the East Penn School District Board of School Directors. Before we rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, I'd like to have everybody please remain standing after the pledge for a moment of silence in honor of Susan Schreiner, who sadly passed away on February 24th. Ms. Schreiner was a library staff assistant at Harbor Country Middle School. Now please rise for Pledge of Allegiance.
Visible, with justice for all.
Thank you. There are no requests to comment this evening, so we'll move on to the agenda for the approval of minutes from the February 24th meeting. I may have a motion.
So moved. Second.
Are there any comments or questions from the board? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Ms. Bowman.
Aye.
Mr. Clay.
Aye.
Ms. Ford.
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski.
Aye.
Mr. Kelly.
Aye.
Ms. Klotz. I can see her on.
Aye. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Dr. Whitney.
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Next is the district update. Dr. Campbell.
Yes, thank you. It's really interesting because last week was the first day of high school spring sports, and just about a week ago, we wrapped up some of our winter sports. So I wanted to recognize some of our winter athletes for their outstanding performance. Congratulations to our Emmaus High School District swimming champions. The boys medley relay consists of Brady King, Julian Volaminik, Griffin Messenlaner, and Joe Lyons. The 200 free, Brady King, 50 free, Griffin Messenlaner, and the girls 200 free relay, Veronica Karboski, Kaylani Silva, Mabry Kraus, and Sriya Reddy. So congratulations to those district champs who will advance to states. Congratulations also to the Emmaus High School track and field medalists who recently medaled at the PSU indoor state meet, including Dino Panagopoulos, who earned 4th place in the long jump, and Tyler Grabinski, also 4th place in the pole vault. Tyler also set a new high school indoor school record at 15 feet, pretty amazing. Our boys wrestlers just competed in the state wrestling tournament this past weekend. Congratulations to Emilio Albanese for his 3rd place finish and Jackson Max for his 8th place finish. We'd also like to recognize Emmaus football senior Will Buck, who was recently named the Big School Scholar Athlete at the Lehigh Valley chapter of the NFF, or National Football Federation Awards Banquet. That happened just about 2 weeks ago. So we're really proud of Will as well. We'd also like to congratulate several Emmaus High School LCTI students who placed at the DECA State Conference that was held in late February in Hershey. Those 2 individuals are Ethan Meitzler and Jacob Walther, and both of them will advance or will attend the International Career Development Conference that's held in Florida later in the month of April. We'd also like to remind Annie families with students who will be entering kindergarten for the upcoming school year. Earlier this month, our kindergarten registration is officially open online. We encourage families to please register students as soon as possible. This year, we seem to be having some real success. In which the first 2 weeks of registration, I think we had about 85 families who'd registered already for kindergarten. So that's awesome, because the sooner we have our families register, the better we can be prepared in terms of staffing needs and things like that. We'd also like to remind our Emmaus High School seniors that our local scholarship program is now open. There's a phenomenal list of scholarships that are available to our seniors, and those applications are due by Friday, March 21st. So just a few weeks. We encourage our students to check out that list that was shared with them in Schoology. A reminder to our community that we have our East Penn International Fair is planned for later this month, March 29th, from 11 to 2 in the high school cafeteria. Promises to be a great afternoon to celebrate the diversity in our school district. We'd also like to encourage families to join us for our spring theater productions that are happening throughout the district this spring. Give a quick shout out, just this past weekend, our students put on their production of Frozen Junior, phenomenal job. Later this month, March 20th through the 22nd, Lower Mackenzie Middle School students will be performing Honk. April 2nd through the 6th, Emmaus High School will be performing Mamma Mia. April 9th and 11th, Albertus Elementary will be performing The Little Mermaid. And finally, wrapping up our theater season on June 4th through the 6th, Lincoln Elementary will be putting on The Wizard of Oz. That information can also be found on our district website, and we encourage our families to come on out and join us. We're also excited to recognize our high school graduating seniors with our grad spotlight program. And so nominations for a current senior to be considered for the grad spotlight, the nominations are open through the end of this week, March 14th. So we encourage our East Penn community to nominate a deserving senior by the end of this week. And finally, before you know it, summer will be here, and we have several opportunities for student summer employment here in the district. In particular, our facilities department is accepting applications for summer maintenance, and information is available on our district website to apply. The deadline for applying is April 4th, so I encourage any students who might be interested to take advantage of that opportunity as soon as possible. And similarly, our technology department is also accepting applications for summer tech employment. Again, information is available on our district website. And those are all of the celebrations and announcements that I have for tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Campbell. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Dr. Whitney?
Just a really quick comment regarding scholarships, the local scholarships for seniors. I went to the high school website and I was not able to find that there. So it's the district website, wasn't able to find it there. I see that it is in the newsletter that goes out, but just seems like that's a pretty important link for a lot of our families. So I would just request that it be placed prominently on those pages.
Sure, I will also say that it was specifically emailed to all of the high school seniors as well.
Okay.
So it was more of a push communication for that very targeted population. But certainly we can take a look at making it publicly available as well.
Yeah, just for the period of time of the application. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for the comment. Anything else? Okay, thank you, Dr. Campbell, for your report. Next item on the agenda is on the budget. We have another installment in our budget series. Tonight, we're going to hear the long-range fiscal and capital. The administration will introduce.
I'll do a very quick introduction for you to give you a little bit of time to settle in. Just as a reminder for any of our community members who are perhaps tuning in, and this is the first budget presentation that you may have been jumping into. We actually began our budget presentations back in January and very strategically and very methodically break down a very comprehensive process into small what we believe to be small chunks of relevant information. So in particular, so far, we've reviewed anticipated revenues for the 25-26 budget, expenditures for the 25-26 budget. Tonight, we're going to take now a more holistic glance when we look at the long range plan as well as our capital plan. And just as a reminder, in terms of where we're going from here, the next two meetings we will begin to dive into budget priorities or some of those new expenditures that are being considered as part of the upcoming budget. And finally, we wrap things up in June with board action on a final budget. So again, we're about midpoint now in a process. And at this point, I'll turn things over to Mr. Stahl.
Great, thank you very much. As has been said, this evening we'll be reviewing the long-range fiscal capital plan. I'll go through it and highlight some areas. We won't focus on every single page in the plan. I know everybody has seen this in the past. However, I think it's good to have a refresher and sort of hit on the pages and the sections. And then I'll point out some features of the plan as we move through. So first I just wanted to highlight that on page 3 in the narrative, in this plan, we've used the actual figures or the audited figures for the prior years. And then next you'll see when we get to it, it has the current year budget that was approved by the board last June. Revisions to that budget or updates to that budget and management's updates that occurred in January and have been incorporated into this plan. And then finally, projections that are based on a series of some assumptions that we'll see as we move throughout the plan. So at the very beginning of the plan, we have this general fund summary. And this really summarizes a majority of the plan into 2 sheets. And as I always do, I just want to take a minute to reorient you with the plan. So as we look down the left-hand column, you can see the revenues are listed there, and we have the total revenues on row 12. We have the totally anticipated expenditures on row 27. And then just below that, we have the surplus or deficit, similar to what we talked about in the last meeting with the current year budget. And then if we move all the way down to the bottom area, on row 41, we have the total fund balance, the ending fund balance, as sort of a monitor of, from year to year, whether we're increasing or decreasing in fund balance. Below that, we have 2 metrics that can be helpful, again, for monitoring over time. Those are the fund balance as a percentage of expenditures. And so you can see that as a percent. And then the total fund balance is a number of months of the anticipated expenditures. And that becomes important later in the plan when, we look at some of the recommendations of groups out there in terms of how much fund balance you want to have on hand. So we'll get back to that in a few minutes. Moving across the top, you can see, as we said, there are those 5 years of actual expenditures. Those are audited directly from our audited financial statements. In column G, you see the 24-25 budget, which was approved by the board in June of 2024. And then in column H, you see the estimates, the updated estimates from January of this year. I wanted to just highlight a few things with regard to the estimates, because we haven't really talked about them. We talked about the 24-25 budget and the 25-26 budget. This is the first time we're really seeing those estimates. With regard to the revenues, if you look at the row 12, you can see from budget to estimated, there's about a $1.7 million positive variance. And I just wanted to highlight what's causing that at this point. And that is the local revenues are about $125,000 more than projected. And that's primarily attributed to earned income taxes and interest earnings. So at least for the first half of the year, we are seeing those being a little stronger in terms of collections than we had budgeted. In the state revenue category, we can see that it's about $1.9 million above the original revenue budget. And think back to last July when the Commonwealth adopted their budget and we talked about the additional funding we received through the basic education funding formula, the special education funding formula, a new charter transition funding line item, and a new adequacy funding line item. And all of that really contributes to that $1.9 million positive variance in the state category. In the federal category, we can see that's at about $283,000 lower. And that really has to do with revised allocations. So we don't actually receive our federal allocations until around the July-August timeframe. And as we've talked about in the past, we usually try to budget the current year and then those are adjusted. So you can see our federal allocations were adjusted downward this year. And I will say that was in July or August of 2024, long before, sort of the more politically driven conversations that we're hearing today. So that was more of the business as usual adjustments that we would see. On the expenditure portion, if we look down to row 23, you can see that there's just a very small variance of about $260,000. And that's just through a variety of categories. Some are up, some are down. But overall, the variance in expenditures is very small at this point. In row 29, if you compare the 24-25 budget, you can see that there was a projected deficit of just a little over $2 million. And that was that planned deficit that we often talk about. It was use of ESSER funds. It was use of funds from fund balance for our technology infrastructure plan. And you can see that now that deficit has reduced to $500,000. Again, so we'll be taking less from fund balance than we had originally anticipated. So that really gets us through the actual, the budget, the estimated. If we move to page 5, that budget and estimated are repeated for convenience. And then we see in column I the 2025-2026 proposed budget, which is really the budget that we the information we reviewed during the board meetings in February, the last 2 board meetings. Beyond that, you can see 26-27 through 29-30 are those projected years, again, based on the assumptions that we'll talk about in just a little bit. In fact, actually, that's the next thing we'll talk about are the assumptions, the next part of the plan. So on page 7, you'll see the assumptions, and down the left column, you can see the various categories that are broken out. In columns D through column H, those are comparing the actual revenues or expenditures year over year. And so you can see the actual change up or down. In column I, that's the 23-24 actual compared to the 24-25 revised budget, because the presumption is that our revised budget is going to be more accurate than the original budget. And in column J, that's the 24-25 revised compared to the 25-26 budget. And so you'll see the changes over that period of time. And we use that to come up with an average over the previous 7 years. In many cases, we applied that average to future years, but there are some cases where we'll use our professional judgment and say, well, that just applying the average doesn't make sense. And there's a few areas I'd like to highlight. As an example, interim real estate taxes. If you look at row 13, you'll see there's quite a variance in terms of the annual increase and decrease. It doesn't really follow a specific pattern of growing or declining. And for that reason, essentially what we're showing is a 0% increase. That doesn't mean we won't receive interim real estate taxes. It just means the amount that we've budgeted for 25-26 will remain constant into the future years. The next one is earned income tax. For the earned income tax for the first year, we've actually used the average. But yes, we've used the average. But each year after that, contemplating sort of a declining economy, if you will, or declining revenues, we've decreased the percentage increase by 1/4% each year. Again, sort of scaling that back, recognizing that there's been inflationary pressures pushing wages up, and that will likely decline moving forward. The next category is interest income. Again, we were in a very high interest rate environment that's starting to decline somewhat. And so, we're sort of in that 4% rate environment. And so again, you see a 0% increase moving forward, no increase or decrease. So we're just assuming that the interest income level will continue into the future. With regard to the Ready to Learn grant, if you look across that, Ready to Learn was relatively stable. It actually didn't increase for many years. And then you can see the significant increase in column I from 23-24 to 24-25. That was that new adequacy money that we received from the state. And you can see that there's a 0% increase. Now, remember that we haven't incorporated any of the governor's budget proposal into the plan or into the budget yet, which is why you see 0% going from 23-24 to 24, 25 to the current year between those two columns. And you see 0% going into the future. What I would say is, if you look at the basic education funding and the special education funding, we have somewhat high increases. We've used the average, and those should account for additional monies we get in adequacy. Because as an example, for next year, what we're seeing is the adequacy amount is very high, but the basic education funding is very low. So they're sort of offsetting each other. So in terms of these future projections, we feel that the increases in the basic education and special education are covering that adequacy portion of the ready to learn. And again, there's still a lot of question about that adequacy piece and how long that will continue. A little bit lower on the expenditure area, you'll see that community college tuition doesn't follow that pattern of, continuing the average percentage. That's primarily because it's been so low that we just consider that not to change over time. I know when we hear from our representative with the college, they always they strive for that 0% change for the school districts. And so that's what we've budgeted there. And then finally, transportation cost is the last one that doesn't follow a pattern. And what we've done is applied the 4%, which is the average annual contract increase year over year. So those are the exceptions to the idea of finding the average over the last several years and then applying that into the future. The next area of the long-range plan is the millage impact and the revenues. On this slide, I'd like to draw your attention to column E, which is the current, the year we're looking at, 25-26. If you look at the bottom rows 21 to 26, this should look very familiar. This is the calculation that we reviewed during the revenue presentation. So this is how the actual real estate tax is calculated, starting with the assessment and working down through the estimated collection percentage, and then finally ending up with the final tax levy. The other thing that's important to note on this slide is closer to the top in row 7 in columns F, G, H, and I, and that is the Act 1 index for future years. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's Independent Fiscal Office annually does actuarial calculations based on information they have, the more up-to-date information they have at the state level. And they project what the Act 1 index is going to be for future years. And so these are projections from that office. And I will say they have been relatively accurate in the near years. And obviously, like any projections, the farther out you go, somewhat less accurate they become. I would say generally, though, the direction that they're going is probably a realistic direction. I don't know that they're going to be off by 2 or 3%. They're probably pretty close. On the next slide, we see the millage rate history in a graphical format. The chart in the middle of the page we saw during the revenue presentation that displays the Act 1 index and then the actual percentage tax increase for each year. And the chart at the bottom is the actual tax millage rate year over year for the past 11 years. The next 2 slides are the revenue. And again, this is just a lot more detail behind that original summary sheet. So this really takes you down to more granular level for state, local, and federal. And so you can look at that, but again, we looked at the summary. The next section of the plan is the expenditures. And so we'll walk through the various expenditure categories and have some highlights. The first area of expenditure are salaries. And you can see the historical salary information there. Probably what we want to spend a little more time on is then page 15, where we're looking at the projections. So if we look at the middle of the page, you can see the projected salary growth into the future. And what we use is the labor contracts or the compensation plans. And we sort of chart those out. So you can see, as noted there, that Any cell that's surrounded by a block is an agreement that's in place. And so you can see, how long those agreements extend. And then, obviously the cells that don't have blocks around them are post after a current agreement. Also, I wanted to highlight that currently the two of our labor agreements, the Teamsters contract and the East Penn Education Support Professionals contract, labeled as 3 and 4, are tied to the annual increase is tied to the Act 1 index. So future years are calculated, the computation that's defined in the contract uses the projected Act 1 index to calculate that percentage in future years. The next area of expenditures is benefits. Again, you can see the historical benefits, but we'll take a look at the projections for benefits. On group insurances, you may recall when we looked at when we had the revenue presentation, the average increase over the past several years for group insurances was 5.38%. That's not all that different from the the medical trend for those plans. And so we've applied that 5.38% as an average over the next 4 years. And then the other one is retirement. The public school employees retirement system annually, again, does an actuarial calculation of where the rates will be for the next several years. And so we've used the information that they make available to put in our plan in terms of percentage rates for the future. The next section of the plan gets into the district-wide instructional, non-instructional. So just for context, what we just looked at was the wages and benefits. So this would be the remainder of the items, sort of simply summarized as supplies and services. So this would be the supplies and services related to the remainder of the expenditures, but broken out by the various categories that are defined by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So the first slide we see is the historical instructional related costs. And I wanted to highlight here at the bottom, over the years, there were some requests to break out some specific information. You can see the sum of the special education lines 12 through 24, and then a sum of the charter school expenses, which are lines 8 and 24, and then specifically a breakout of what the brick and mortar tuition costs and the cyber tuition costs are, because you sort of have to dig to find those. They're in our annual financial reports, but they're a little hard to find. So we've made them a little more prominent here so you can see those. Again, on slide 19, that's our projections for the future. Slide 20 is the non-instructional. So real quick, instructional, if you think of a classroom or direct instruction to a student, that would be instructional. If you take a step back, administrative support, that's non-instructional. So when we talk about instructional and non-instructional, just to give some context. So on slide 20, again, you see the non-instructional historical. Slide 21, we have the non-instructional projected. Those are continued on slides 22 and 23. At the bottom of slide 23, I wanted to highlight that you can see the calculation of the annual contribution to capital reserve. As you will recall, from the expenditure presentation, we're using that to help fund part of the implementation of the capital project of the K-8 realignment plan. And we're doing that by not transferring all the dollars and then having those available in the general fund to spend. So this is the computation at the bottom that shows us how much we would ordinarily be transferring, the amount that we're not transferring, and we'll be spending out of the general fund, in essence, using a portion of the capital reserve fund. On page 24 and 25, we have the debt service, again, the historical and projected. Again, there's a supplemental calculation here to show the existing debt service and then the projected new debt service that is related to the K-8 realignment plan. Again, we're getting this new debt service from the millage study that's completed by our financial advisors. On slide 26, this is the district priority slide. At this time, the list of priorities has been redacted. They will be presented during the next two presentations. Obviously, you can see the total, which we already shared with you during the expenditure presentation, but as soon as those are presented, we'll remove that redaction and you'll be able to see the breakout of all the specific priorities on this slide. The next portion of the plan is the capital projects plan. And this is really related to our capital reserve fund and how we use that. On page 28, you can see information about the school district. I wanted to highlight that at the bottom under notes, it says student enrollment is October 1, is the October 1, 2023 enrollment reported by PDE. That's actually just a typographical error. It's the October 1, 2024. So the enrollment has been updated to the most recent enrollment we have. It was just inadvertently missed in editing there in the notes section. And we use that October 1st enrollment because that's what's reported to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, sort of the official enrollment at a time point in the year for the school district. So on pages 29, 30, and 31, we see the more significant capital projects. And I used to say the major capital projects, but I have to be careful now because we have sort of the routine maintenance, which is built into the regular facilities budget. We have the somewhat significant capital projects, which are these, which would be like a roof, a new chiller, ongoing significant, somewhat significant capital projects. And then you would have obviously a full-blown capital project renovation, which is what we have with regard to the K-8 realignment. So these are that sort of middle of the road. And you can see we have these scheduled out for planning purposes over the next 10 years, primarily to ensure that we'll be able, to have a funding plan in place and be able to fund these projects at the time frame that they're needed. This is a dynamic plan, and all of these things are evaluated from year to year. So we could be planning on replacing a roof at an elementary school, but as we approach, we may realize that actually it's that it's reaching its expected lifespan, but it's still in good shape. So maybe we'll get another year out of it. So this does become a little bit of dominoes, moving them back and forth at times, just for what makes the most sense. And again, what we can afford. We don't want to get, $20 million of projects in 1 year. We try to keep this manageable from year to year. Related to that then is the next section, the summary of the general and capital reserve funds. And this is where we really look at that funding from year to year. So on page 33, you can see the historical, but on page 34, you can see this interaction between the general fund and the capital reserve fund. So we can see at the top, it's a summary, but most importantly, that transfer to capital reserve on line 15, which then comes down to the lower part of the schedule. And this is where we monitor how much money is in that reserve fund and how much we're spending on projects each year to ensure that we'd be able to fund those projects from year to year. The next section is the evaluation of the combined fund balance and the capital reserve contribution targets. And these are metrics that we've added to this plan. They are to evaluate. They're not absolute, but they sort of help us monitor over time the health of the district, if you will, or the health of our fund balance. So the first one is the evaluation of the combined fund balance. And what we do is we take that general fund balance and our capital reserve balance and combine those. And then we compare those to the standard that's out there, both by the Government Finance Officers Association, the GFOA, as well as the bond rating agencies tend to look for 2 months of reserve of your anticipated operating expenditures in reserve. So that goes all the way back to the beginning when we were looking at that first page. And it was the number of months of reserve. That was the number of months of general fund reserves we had. This combines that with the capital project fund to see how close we are to that 2-month objective that the bond rating agencies will look at when we go out to issue for debt. And then the one below is again a measure of how much should we be contributing to our capital reserve annually. One way to measure that obviously would be just to look at the amount that we have in projects and can we fund all that. But this is another metric that that uses a formula to determine how much you should be investing in your facilities for upkeep annually. And again, we can, as an example, we can see in column I at the bottom, we're about $1.1 million below what this would suggest as a target. But recall that we've chosen to use some monies from capital reserve, and we're withholding those. So reasonably, we're on target, I would say, with regard to that metric. The next section, which we added last year, is the technology plan, to start to look at the life cycle of our technology infrastructure and our technology equipment. On page 39 and 40, you see a schedule of the technology equipment that will need to be replaced and refreshed over the next several years, and the cost of that. Again, so we can ensure that we have the funds needed to do that refresh at the time that it's needed. And then on page 41, we see more specifically the technology, the infrastructure, the backbone of our network, or the network infrastructure. And again, the sort of a plan like we saw in the facilities piece of what's going to come up each year, and we want to be sure we'll be able to fund that. At the bottom is again a calculation of, you know, how much has been set aside in our committed fund balance, and how much we have available to use from that year over year, how much we'll be pulling out, again, to monitor to be sure we'll be able to pay for our projects. The next section of the plan is the scenario analysis. There's actually like 3 sets of scenarios. And real quickly, if you look at each scenario, let me just flip the page here. The first scenario, scenario 1, starts with a 0% tax increase in the first year. Scenario 2 starts with a 2% tax increase in 25-26, and scenario 3 starts with a 4% tax increase in 25-26. And then each of the iterations, A, B, and C, look at something different. A looks at, well, what if we had 0% in the out years? B looks at, well, what would be the average tax increase that would be needed to achieve a 5% fund balance in 29-30? And then C looks at the maximum anticipated increase under Act 1. So think back to that tax page and the projected increases. So it gives you a variety of scenarios to look at and see the impact of those scenarios. The impact of a 0% tax increase in year 1 is 2%, 4%, et cetera. I will say last year there was a suggestion, which I think we did implement in the plan, and that was, could there be a scenario if we didn't include the priorities? What I will say at this point is, because we've talked about, we have that structural deficit that we have to work on removing. It doesn't really, a scenario removing the priorities wouldn't make much sense yet. However, as we move along and we, continue to rework the plan, we'll certainly, when appropriate, put that scenario in here so that you can see, the impact of not including priorities. We're nearing the end. This next section is supplemental information. This is the section where we look at we look at many levels of the value of a home, but more specifically, we tend to look at the average assessed value of a residential property. This year, it's $215,749 based on information from the county assessment office. And so if you look at the top in column J, you can see that at a 4% tax increase, that average assessed residential property would see their real estate tax bill increase $181. If the increase was 3%, it'd be $135. And if it was 2%, you could see it's $90. So just, again, a person could look at this and say, my home is valued at $500,000, and they would use the $500,000 column. But that's how this is laid out. The next one is more forward-looking, so that really looks at the current year and what the additional taxation would be. The next chart on page 48 is forward-looking and says, okay, based on the scenarios or the tax rates that have been applied in this long-range plan, what would my total tax bill be for over the next 5 years? And again, you can see that we've highlighted the average assessed residential property for the quick identification. On page 49, there's included a comparison of budget to budget, 24-25 to 25. Sorry, the first one is the budget to the estimate, 24-25 budget to estimate. And then the one on the right side is the 24-25 budget to the 25-26 budget. Again, it's very high level, quick reference, and you can see the percentage change in those areas. Page 50 ordinarily would contain the K-8 realignment millage phase-in plan. We will include that in future versions of the plan. We just have not included that yet in this plan. And then finally, at the end, we have a glossary of terms, as you saw in the budget presentations, and were included. Those are there for reference. So that gets us to the end of the plan. I'd actually like to take just a minute to go all the way back to the beginning to the summary page and just make a few comments on a specific dynamic we see. So if you look at the surplus or deficit, actually, let's look down at the total fund balance on row 41 on this summary sheet. And you can see that the fund balance is declining year over year to a significant negative fund balance in the last year of the plan in 29-30. I wanted to call that out. I'm sure people have seen that, and I anticipated there may be a question, so I thought I would just go there right away. There's a couple things contributing to that. First, as we've said, in the current year, there's a structural deficit, which we need to remove, and obviously that compounds itself over time. However, that's not the sole contributing factor to that overall decline. The other thing is as you saw, if you looked at the Act 1 index, we're seeing a declining Act 1 index, which really limits the district's ability to raise taxes to generate additional revenue to keep up with rising costs. And then the third factor is the recent inflationary pressures. So if you think about the averaging that we use, more recently, we've seen significant inflationary pressures pushing rates up. And so our averages we're using moving forward are maybe somewhat elevated. I guess it's the risk of not knowing what the future holds. And so we've used, that look back to apply to the future. So a combination of those things, those inflationary pressures really pushing expenses and expenses outgrowing the overall revenue is causing that decline over time. And again, this is a work in progress. We certainly need to continue first thing we need to do is get that structural deficit out there and then continue to look at this plan and the assumptions moving into the future and see if, any of those assumptions could be reasonably revised from sort of our starting point. But again, this is our starting point. We have to start somewhere in terms of the overall plan. So with that, Dr. Levinson, that really brings me to the end of the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Saul, for that comprehensive overview of this plan. Again, very thorough, very informative, and we can make a lot of projections from it. But as you said, it does represent a current snapshot of the numbers as we've already proposed through both the revenue and the expenditure. So there's, again, more work forthcoming.
Yep.
So I'm sure that's going to color my colleagues' comments here. So I will open up to the floor to questions or comments.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like this is my eighth iteration of the budget presentation. I think every year I understand it a little bit better, or at least I think I do. My question is not necessarily specifically, but I need the numbers in there say with regard to next year, but just at the end, as you were talking about managing the structural deficit and working with your assumptions, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that process of looking at the assumptions, if that is in fact how we go about, adjusting the structural deficit. Do we what does back testing look like? I know we have all the historical data to look back at. But what does it look like on your end that, I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be part of this presentation, but when you're taking a look at your assumptions from, 4 years ago, how they may have matched up to the actual numbers from 4 years ago, what does that process look like? Because I imagine you're making assumptions across every single line item on this. So what does that process look like for you?
The first step is going to be going back and looking at, sorry, let me step back a second. Recall that I said that a lot of this work had happened in January. And so we have 2 more months of information available. So the first step will be to go back and review the revenues and expenditures for the current year and see how they're performing and see if there's any trends, because we may be assuming even in January, a different level of growth than we're seeing now that the year is becoming more mature in terms of revenues and expenditures. So that will be the first step, is to look at that. The second thing will be to sort of more look at the assumptions in a more granular way. Because again, we've sort of just applied those, I did a once over. Where are the anomalies? I pointed those out. But is there, do we need to look more deeply into our revenue projections and the expenditure projections? So again, it's sort of a methodical process of sort of going back and re-looking at everything. And the benefit of time sometimes helps us with that.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Jankowski.
Again, thank you. Always a great presentation. So as you prepare the budget and as we're preparing for the next school year, one of the unknowns is always government funding. So, we don't know how the budget's going to end up in the state. We don't know what's going to happen. If the Department of Education, Federal Department of Education is going to be dissolved, or so impacting the funding. Obviously more so with the state funding versus federal, but in any event, that's still funding we rely on. How do you mitigate against that in your projections, in your preparations for next year? Because obviously we'll most likely approve this budget before the state approves its budget, before anything, is resolved with the federal government. So how do you mitigate against, what maybe is a substantial lack of funding, or as in some years in past, an increase in funding?
Yeah, so obviously we do our best. And I think the current year with the budget approved in July was a surprise to many people. So we could not have anticipated that. If you listen to any legislator talk about the process of the budget happening in Harrisburg, anything can happen at the end of the day. But I think in terms of trying to get the best information we can, Dr. Campbell and I meet with our local legislators and talk to them about where they see the process heading. And again, they even tell us that we'll be very cautious about, anything can happen at the end of the day. But we at least try to talk to them about the process. We're very fortunate that one of our local legislators is chair of the House Education Committee. So sometimes that helps to have a little more insight as to, because we are education and education funding. But again, we try to get as much information as we can and use that to our benefit. But sometimes it's like shaking the 8 ball, I have to admit. There's no magic answers sometimes.
So what is our, rainy day fund if there is a lack of funding? I mean, do we dip into the budgetary reserve, or is that also something that we would look to do, and at risk of, getting to a negative balance perhaps sooner than 29-30?
Yeah, it's a matter of timing. So as an example, let's just use this current year. Let's say that somehow the federal government was able to stop federal funds for the remainder of the year. We'd have to talk about that and say, well, I don't think we're going to just discontinue our Title I reading program mid-year, right? So the recommendation would be to pay for that out of our budgetary reserve. But then what you have to do is, now you've spent those funds and there's some hard conversations about, well, what do we do next year? And do we need to replenish those funds in some way, or are they spent, but that's okay because again, it depends on the magnitude of the spend. It's the same thing would be true next year. So if we didn't know, and that's sort of where we are with the federal monies, is we don't know what's gonna happen. And the recommendation, at least from administration, is to just plan business as usual with the risk of, we don't get those funds, we need to make mid-year adjustments in some way. And maybe that's continuing the Title I reading program, but looking at some other area where we may need to cut mid-year to mitigate that.
Okay, good. And then just we say this every year, obviously, these numbers are based on the algorithms and it's a formula that you've used year and year. Obviously you have 2 months, so as the news media likes to say, it's gonna be an automatic 4% increase and whatever. So your efforts are appreciated over the next 2 months to find ways to reduce expenditures, go out there and find us more money and reduce our millage rate. So appreciate all of your efforts.
Thank you. Let me just be clear, it's a team effort.
Yes,
So.
absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Giancassi. Dr. Whitney.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation as always. I think this is my 4th one. Not as much of a grizzled veteran as some of my colleagues here, but I'm starting to feel like one. So, but these presentations are always really enjoyable and enlightening. I took the liberty of going back and looking at last year's long-range plan and doing some quick comparisons and just the general. Well, I mean, the one thing that stands out, and you identified that there's a bit more of a bleak financial picture at this moment that you're projecting 5 years from now. I noticed, in last year's 28-29 projection and ending fund balance 21.4 million. This year, that number is essentially 0. So, and looking at kind of how that shook out, it looks to me like the majority of that change is driven by a reduction of local revenue estimates or local revenue projections. So can you just talk a little bit more about that? Because it seems like those are pretty substantial.
Sure. So many of our local revenues are like our earned income tax is sort of economically driven. So I think last year at this time, interest rates were at 5%, like the outlook was very different. And so, right, wrong, or indifferent, the plan reflects the current outlook moving into the future. And so I think the outlook at that time was things are doing really well. We're going to continue to see this. I think since that time, we've just had this inflationary period that has had a significant impact. We've seen declining interest rates. Again, I think the economic outlook doesn't feel the same, at least to me, this year than it did last year.
And I also noticed like the assessment valuation for has gone down as well. Is that based on actual numbers or is that based on projected? How does that figure out?
So the current, 25-26 is based on the current data we're receiving. Looking at the future, it's based on that averaging. And if you look, I'll actually just pull it up, we're very close to it. If you look, the last couple of years have been a bit lower. We've been at 0.86, 0.63. There was a period of time, you go back to 16, 17, 17, 18, 18, 19. That's when the warehouse parks were being developed. We had, assessments were really increasing rapidly in that time period. And now we're starting to see that decline. Now we know we have development. I mean, there's a lot of subdivisions being built, but that doesn't affect the assessment quite as quickly as a big warehouse does.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Thank you, Dr. Whitney. Additional questions? Ms. Bowman.
Just refresh my memory on the structural deficit. Looking at the numbers because of the state increase, it looks like it was 500,000, but then your projections going forward seem like it's bigger than that we have to close. I'm just a little confused on what the actual amount is.
Sure. The actual amount for 25-26 is currently 1.9 million. And I think what you were looking at was row 29. And the structural, that wasn't a structure, it was a planned deficit for 24-25 of a little over 2 million. Like we were planning to use fund balance, money that we had set aside in fund balance. That amount for the current year is reduced to 502,000. For 25-26, it's currently showing 3.1 million. A portion of that is again, money that a planned spend of fund balance for the technology infrastructure. But the remainder, which is about 1.9 million, is that structural deficit that's above and beyond what we had planned for use.
So when we approved this last year, I guess I was thinking that that was a one-time, you know, one-time spend so that the coming year, we wouldn't actually need that money because we bought the technology and now we're done, but that's not the case.
No. Let me just go forward to a slide. Is this slide. So each year we are designating a portion of our fund balance.
Okay.
To be used for the technology infrastructure. So you can see on this chart, the deletions, which is basically expenditures.
Yeah.
I think that's row 45. That is the annual amount that we would be spending from fund balance. So that would show up as a planned deficit each year. Because what we're doing is we're committing those funds in our fund balance to be used for that technology piece. And then we're spending it from our fund balance.
Okay.
And so you will continue to see that into the future.
Okay.
These amounts that are listed across row, I think it's 45.
And then you said that it really didn't make sense to do a projection that didn't include the priorities because we have so much work to do to make up the deficit. I wasn't really sure if I understood the.
Yeah, so that structural deficit, we need to work that out first. So we're actually. Right now, we have incorporated a 4% tax increase.
Mhm.
And we have additional spending beyond that, which we have to work to eliminate. So in terms of the scenario analysis, it's not really gonna make a lot of sense because we're sort of at that 4% right now. Essentially eliminating the priorities at this point would just bring us back to 4%.
Okay.
Okay,
So right now the priorities are almost not even included in the budget, that with the 4% increase.
at a 4% increase, they would not be.
Okay. I
But
got it.
but the solution is not necessarily that will be brought forth is not necessarily eliminate all the priorities.
Okay, it'd be interesting to find out what your solution to that is. I look forward to that.
Thank you for the comment. Anything? Ms. Ford?
Mr. Saul, thanks again for the presentation, always chock full of information. My question is, I guess more of an inquiry, I like what you said about, the magic 8 ball and not knowing there's a lot of unknowns. But I've been really thinking about, I look at the charter school numbers, how they've been increasing and outpacing, regular education. And, I've been reading a lot of articles, registration for charter schools is up. And so I guess, are there conversations happening, meeting with legislatures, if the bottom falls out, how do we ensure the public school students get what they need if these numbers continue to grow the way they're growing? And is there a contingency plan for that?
I don't have a good answer for that because essentially at this point, the funding mechanism is beyond our control, right? It's prescribed in law. What I will say though is to the articles that you've read and seen, I just saw one this weekend that there is growing bipartisan support to address this. When charter schools first started in the early 90s, like the charter, not cyber, but charter schools, only certain areas are affected by brick and mortar charter schools. Then cyber charter schools came along and they didn't really impact all areas of the Commonwealth. So not all legislators heard the feedback, which they are now hearing, because now all, especially post-pandemic, almost all areas of the Commonwealth are being impacted by charter enrollments and more specifically, the funding mechanism related to charter enrollments. And so because all legislators and all districts are now hearing this, I think there's growing support to address it. On top of that, in the last 2 weeks, I think, maybe 3 weeks, the Auditor General released I think it's 200+ page audit report with regard to growing fund balance at cyber charter schools, which has garnered a lot of attention as well. So I think there was a time in my career where I thought charter schools will never be, like, this funding mechanism will not be changed. I don't know that it's this year, but I think there is definitely growing attention to what you exactly pointed out in terms of the overall cost and how it impacts every district differently. What I mean by that is every district's tuition rate is different. It's based on our expenses, not the cost to educate the student at the charter school. So I'm sorry I can't answer your question about how we mitigate that moving forward. But hopefully the additional information helps put that into context.
Actually, thank you for that, and I just think it's just one of those things that we keeping at the forefront of the conversation. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Ford. Okay, any other comments from the board?
I just have an overall comment that I forgot to say earlier. There was the gentleman that came and referred to your spreadsheet. I forget what his little moniker for it was, the amazing something spreadsheet, and it really is. You know, I really would encourage the public, like, if anybody's curious about where school money is coming from and going to, this lays it all out. Also, during my time on the board, I've really come to appreciate how important a business manager is to the district. I don't know how a school district could function without one, after seeing how much planning goes into each year's budget, and all of the calculations and estimations that you're making based on 25 or more areas of uncertainty, and doing it really well. During each year that I've been on the board, you've managed to sort of conservatively underestimate how much revenue is coming in and overestimate how much is going to go out, so that at the end of the year, when we've seen the budget, the numbers always look better than what we budgeted. So just want to thank you for the hard work that you've put into this and budgets in the past as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Muller. Any other comments? I'll just say in closing, again, thank you for the presentation. Certainly does raise a lot of questions and thoughts and ideas about how things are going to move forward with the budget process. I do think that this is tough. It's always a tough slough in the budget process here, but this is also very tough because in any given year, we have a lot of competing priorities in addition to meeting just the standard needs of the district. There are priorities that we're trying to bring in to address needs and wants that the district is looking to incorporate in addition to what we're already doing. And then now you layer onto that, the long range plan with the K-8 realignment. It's a lot to balance. So, I'm probably not saying anything that you haven't already thought about. But, I mean, we have yet to hear about the specific priorities, but as you look at that list, I think that in terms of, what's important right now, we got to meet our existing needs. If we're going to incrementally add things to the budget, focusing on what's needed to lay the groundwork for K-8 realignment, I think is going to be a priority. And then certainly every year, we're often mandated to expand personnel because we have to meet certain quotas or ratios of student to service needs. So again, it's a lot to balance. And, it really is, I think this cycle is probably going to take a much harder look as to what we might be looking to advance that's new in terms of expenditures and balance that off in terms of revenues. And I don't know, again, you say, with Dr. Whitney's point, looking at last year versus this year, and then your answer that, the winds have shifted a little bit in just a year. Whether we become more conservative in terms of looking at what's going to happen in projections, and that may also guide and, maybe curb some of the things we try and. Again, only, a couple months into this, and we still have more. With that, again, thank you for the presentation and for the work that you and your team do.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda is personnel. I have a motion.
So moved. Second.
Are there any comments or questions from the board? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Pelleggi,
Aye.
Ms. Ford,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Ms. Klotz,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Whitney,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson,
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Before we move on, I think Dr. Campbell has some comments.
I do, thank you. I just wanted to recognize several really valuable team members, some of whom are retiring at the end of this year, including Lori King. She is retiring after 21 years of service as a special education teacher. She's currently at Iyer Middle School. In addition, Linda Chrisman is retiring actually at the mid-April from Jefferson Elementary. She's been a staff assistant at Jefferson Elementary, has spent certainly a lot of her time working in our school library there. She's actually been with us for 34 years. So we certainly appreciate Linda's commitment to East Penn. And Pam Cannon, who is a member of our food service staff at Willow Lane Elementary, she's retiring. Actually just recently retired after 11 years in the school district. And I wanted to congratulate and express our gratitude for our retirees for their outstanding commitment to the students in our schools. And I also wanted to recognize Mr. Jordan Fortier, who the board accepted his resignation this evening. Mr. Fortier has been an assistant principal at Emmaus High School for many years, a valuable part of our team. And we wish him luck as he continues his administrative career and advances as a principal nearby. So we certainly wish him well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Campbell. Moving on to business operations, I am going to ask for a motion to approve A through F together. But before I do that, I wanted to highlight under item E, use of district facilities. There's one additional item that does appear on board docs, and I'd like to highlight. Dorney Park and Wildwater Kingdom is going to rent the auditorium at Iyer for leadership training. That's an additional item that had not appeared earlier. So with that, if there are no objections, I'd like to get a motion to approve items A through F together.
So moved.
Second.
Any comments or questions from the board? Ms. Bowman?
A comment, just about the donations. It's really wonderful how many people and organizations are donating to help our, I guess these are for our graduating seniors. Maybe I shouldn't make that assumption. But I'm wondering if the administration could say a few words in case members of the public are interested in funding scholarships for next year. How would they go about doing that?
You are correct that these are to support the scholarships for Emmaus High School seniors that we referenced earlier as part of my announcements. In the event that there are community members who are interested, community members, local businesses, organizations who are interested in supporting a scholarship for the future, they can simply reach out to our high school counseling department and/or a member of the high school administration, where we can certainly easily connect them with someone from our counseling department.
Thank you.
Ms. Bowman? I would like to piggyback on that, and again, thank our generous donors for for those contributions. It's obviously very important to help with the futures of our students and using those funds for needed expenses. Okay, we have a motion on E through F. If there's no further comments or questions, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Ms. Ford,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Ms. Klotz,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Whitney,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Aye.
Mr. Pelagi,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Next item is curriculum. There are 3 items, A, B, and C. I'm going to take them individually. First item is educational conferences. May I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any comments or questions? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Ms. Klotz,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Whitney,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Aye.
Mr. Pelagi,
Aye.
Ms. Ford,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Under curriculum, item B, the approval of the 25-26 East Bend School District student teacher calendar. It's the third reading, followed by adoption. It's my understanding there have been no changes since the second reading. Are there any additional questions or comments from the board? Okay, may I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
All right, I should have, this is now when I ask, are there any additional questions or comments? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Ms. Klotz,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Whitney,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Aye.
Mr. Pelagi,
Aye.
Ms. Ford,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Item C is approval of the 2025 through the 2028 comprehensive plan. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any comments or questions from the board? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Ms. Klotz,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Whitney,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Aye.
Mr. Pelagi,
Aye.
Ms. Ford,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Our next item is policy, second reading. Does administration have any comments regarding the for second reading?
We have one minor change that I believe Dr. Politis is gonna just summarize.
Absolutely, yes. The one minor change to policy 103.1, we are recommending removing attachments 2, 3, and 4. The attachments do change often, are available to families as needed, and they're not needed to be part of the policy. No other changes.
Okay. Are there any further comments or questions from the board about the policies under review? Okay, well, conclude second reading. We'll look to the next meeting for third reading and adoption. All right, other educational entities. I believe we have a report on LCTI from Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Dr. Levinson. The Joint Operating Committee of LCTI met on February 26th. During the brief meeting, we were first introduced to the Director of Curriculum and Instruction, Kathy Murray, who brings with her a background in CTE in the hospitality industry. We were provided with an update on the number of applications for next year. 21 out of 41 programs currently have applications that exceed their current capacity, indicating another strong sense of demand for LCTI's programming. We learned about Mike Schlossberg's visit to the school, where he learned about the variety of programs LCTI offers its students. We heard about a recent PD focus on AI with a specific lens on how it can be used to support CTE. This is a new initiative and an area where they have had very little training, so they are beginning with the basics of how AI can support teachers and staff through lesson planning, increasing student engagement, and administrative tasks. And finally, we received an update on the sending district's votes of the 25-26 LCTI budgets. At the time of the meeting, 6 of the 9 districts voted to approve the budget with no votes cast by any board member of those six districts. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Are there any comments or questions from the board? I appreciate that update. Look forward to your next review. Moving on to announcements. The board did meet in executive session this evening. We covered topics related to litigation and personnel. Our next regular meeting is in 2 weeks on Monday, March 24th at 7:30 in this room. No further business. I'd like to get a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting is adjourned. See you in 2 weeks. Have a good evening.